Some of the soldering irons on your bench heat up off a USB-C cable in seconds, but the technique it uses is over 5,000 years old. It's older than every technology you can name, and this is the story of how we got from fire and a lump of copper to the soldering iron you can hold in your hands. So, let's start with chapter 1, Ancient Origins. It starts in ancient Mesopotamia, around 3000 years before Christ. This is where the earliest evidence of soldering appears. People joining two metals together using lead, which they discovered as a byproduct with discovering silver. There were no soldering irons, there was craftsmanship and skill. A craftsman would heat up a joint over an open flame to make the metal flow and join two pieces of metal together. 1,000 years later, around 2000 years before Christ, they began to soldering with tin. The Egyptians used this technique to marble sheets of gold into each other to create intricate jewelry we still marvel at today. Some of the finest examples were found in the tomb of Tutankhamun. A craftsman would literally blow through a pipe into the charcoal pieces, directing a jet hot air precisely where it was needed. And that was actually the first precision soldering that existed. Human lungs and a piece of pipe. So, now let's go over to chapter 2, Rome. Move forward to the Roman Empire and soldering becomes an infrastructure. The Romans used it to build pipes that would carry water across their aqueducts into their cities. But we will never know the recipe because the Roman named Pliny the Elder wrote the recipe almost 2000 years ago. He described it a solder they called tertiarium, a solder that was made out of 2 parts of lead to 1 part tin. That's remarkably close to the lead tin solder people would use for the next 2000 years. The Romans have essentially standardized the solder. Now we go over to chapter 3, Middle Ages and Resistance. Through the Middle Ages, craft kept refining. Metalworkers used soldering for creating armors, for the fitting for the great cathedrals, and for the intricate of decorative work. In the Islamic world, they used this technique to inlay brass and copper vessels into delicate gold and silver patterns, and that craftsmanship influenced European metalworkers to turn in. By around 50th century, lead-based solder had become widespread, prizing for its lower melting point. For thousands of years though, one thing didn't change. The heat still came from the fire. It worked quickly before it cooled down and you need to reheat it again and again. And so we go over to chapter 4, Industrial Revolution. And the piece changed completely. Soldering became essential for mass production. Heating boilers, railways, shipbuilding, all relied on strong metal joints. And there came the 2 biggest improvements. First of all, better fluxes like rosin, which cleaned the metal and let the tin flow more reliably. And the second most important tool that they discovered was how they delivered heat into the point where they wanted to. That began happening with a blowtorch. That gave a full control over the flame for the workers. And so the soldering became more science than just a craftsmanship. But the iron itself was fundamentally still a piece of metal you heated up externally. And so we go over to chapter 5, the electric era, the best era. Let's go. That changed. We didn't use fire anymore. In 1921, in Germany, a German engineer called Ernst Sachs created the first electric soldering iron that was mass produced for the industry. He named the company ERSA, the letters from his own name. This was the leap the craft have waited 5,000 years for. No more fire, no more reheating a cold clump of metal. Now the iron generated its own heat electrically and held it. For the first time in history, soldering iron stayed hot on its own. That's how we go over to the chapter 6, which is called Instant Heat. But electric iron still had one flaw. They were really slow to heat up and you had to leave them on for all day long. But in 1941 this changed. A radio repairman called Carl Weller solved it. And if you want to know more, I made a separate video about him, you can go watch it now or later. But in short, he created a pistol-shaped soldering iron using a transformer and let you heat up the tip almost instantly when you pull the trigger, and of course cool it down the moment you let go of the trigger. It was the first heat on demand, and although he was rejected by manufacturers, so he didn't give up. He built all the units himself in his basement, and so it became one of the most trusted tools in the electronics. And so we now have heat on demand. And with this, we can go over to chapter 7, which is refinement. As electronics exploded after the war, the demand got finer, the precision was everything. And a little Japanese company called Hakko pushed this form into its modern form. I also made a separate video about Hakko if you want to watch this. It covers the whole history about this company and tells you about why it's so important to the industry. But I will talk about this real quick in this video also. In short, in 1976 they introduced a ceramic heating element which heated up and cooled down almost instantly. They also added a temperature control so the iron held an exact heat. And eventually they fused the heating element and the tip into a single unit, which was the T12. It is amazing and people still use it till this day. So it delivered heat exactly where the work happened, instantly. So as I said, most irons use this technology today, so we go to the chapter 8, which is today and the future. So today you can buy a soldering iron the size of a pen that will heat up to the full temperature in about 6 seconds of a USB-C charger, the same that your phone uses. The solder itself has changed too because of the health regulations. The world has moved to the lead-free solder, ending a 5,000 years run from lead that started all the way in Mesopotamia. And cutting the edge, factories now use lasers to solder in components too small to dedicate for any human hand. So that's the whole timeline we just went through, and look at this journey. We went all the way from craftsmanship in Mesopotamia, flowing lead over an open fire, to Egyptians blowing through the pipes into the charcoal, to Romans plumbing their aqueducts, to the first electric iron in 1921, to Weller's instant heat gun, to Hakko's ceramic precision, to USB-C pen that heats in 6 seconds. Every one of those steps was someone looking back at the tool he had and not accepting its limits and making it better. 5,000 years of people solving the same problem and making it each time a little bit better than the previous one. And that's the entire history of soldering right there, sitting quietly inside of your iron on your bench. So I really appreciate it that you stayed all the way till the end. If you enjoyed it, you can leave a like or subscribe, or just do anything, leave a comment about anything you want. I read all of the comments, I react to them. So thank you again, and till the next time, bye.